Good evening, dear Medyascope viewers. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. This evening on our agenda, we have the coronavirus. We will be speaking to Associate Professor of Genetics and Neuroscience, Çağhan Kızıl. But first, let's take a look at the developments of the week. As of last night, the death toll from the coronavirus has jumped to 75, and the number of positive cases reported has increased to 3,629, with a total of 7,286 tests carried out within the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of tests carried out in Turkey to around 40,000. Here is an update on the developments relating to the coronavirus in Turkey.
During a press conference conducted with Education Minister Ziya Selçuk on March 25, Health Minister Fahrettin Koca stated that 26 patients had recovered as of March 24, the first figures for recovery announced in Turkey, including 2 senior citizens. Meanwhile, the Health Ministry also released a memorandum for all of Turkey's 81 provinces, suspending non-emergency surgeries and requesting those coming to Turkey for the purpose of health tourism postpone their visits. It was also announced that all private hospitals that qualify will be considered pandemic hospitals and be required to dedicate several wards and ICUs to patients with the COVID-19. Turkish schools will remain closed until April 30 due to coronavirus pandemic and will continue to offer remote learning from home for students during this time period, said Education Minister Ziya Selçuk. This week was our test week for homeschooling, but as of next week, we'll offer much more quality programs for children, Selçuk said. This comes after children on March 23 were shown an animated cartoon depicting the execution of former Prime Minister Adnan Menderes as part of their homeschooling. Following widespread criticism, the Education Ministry has launched an investigation into the incident. Head of the Council for Higher Education, Yekta Saraç, said that the universities will be closed for the spring term, except for digital and remote education. Saraç stressed there will be no face-to-face classes at universities during the spring term, while the university entrance exam will be held on July 25-26. While a nationwide state of emergency has not been announced, the Interior Ministry did restrict Turkish citizens who are older than 65 years old and suffering from chronic illnesses from leaving their homes. Further, Health Minister Koca has proposed an individually declared emergency rule for citizens, urging a strictly implemented self-containment for at least 3 weeks, during which the pandemic could make its peak. They ask me whether we will declare a state of emergency. There is no need to do that. You should take your own measures, Koca said. Turkish Airlines has suspended all international flights except 5 routes as of March 27. The company will fly only to New York City, Washington, D.C., Hong Kong, Addis Ababa, and Moscow, Board Chairman İlker Aycı said.
This evening, we will speak with Associate Professor of Genetics and Neuroscience, Çağhan Kızıl. Çağhan Kızıl is the group leader at the German Center for Neurodegenerative Diseases within the Helmholtz Association and the Dresden University of Technology in Germany. Good evening, Dr. Kızıl. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Good evening. Thank you for your invitation.
So in recent years, many health experts have warned that a global pandemic of this scale was inevitable. At this point, the virus is testing the resilience of even the most well-equipped healthcare systems. Has the virus accelerated beyond the capacity of the health system in Turkey just yet?
So there has been many studies that were modeling how a pandemic could happen with any virus or any infectious disease for many years, because we have, as the world, witnessed a lot of such instances recently and in the past. Now this is beyond the expectations. So what we are experiencing with COVID-19 is actually a little bit beyond the expectations, because now almost 200 countries and the numbers of infections increase exponentially every day. So I think it wouldn't be wrong to say that no health system and no country was fully prepared for this. So even the highest well-equipped and highest preparation countries such as Germany or other countries like China did a great job, but still people are cautious. People are cautious to see what is coming and how the preparedness levels can even be further increased. So we can simply say, yes, no one is prepared for it, no country. But there are some measures taken. For Turkey, I think we are falling a little bit short of what we had to do from the very beginning. Because here, I think we have to underline that these infectious diseases are, they have a dormant period. This is a staggered response, not a snapshot. So if you see the cases today, it means that there's a history. And the research shows that in Italy, it's been speculated that the first entry to the country was January 1st, but the first case was identified in February 20. So there's more than a month of dormancy and spread in the community, and then there's a boost, and there's a manifestation of the disease, and then it comes to the peak phase. So I think Italy is still not in the peak phase. So Turkey is just maybe starting, or we are maybe in the middle of it, not reached to the highest level. So my opinion is no preparation in the world is enough. So we have to do the maximum, more than the maximum we could do. And especially two things, the social distancing and as radical as possible, depending on the situation, and high number of diagnostic tests. I think both are insufficient in Turkey.
Well, yeah, you mentioned that indeed Turkey is falling short of taking the necessary precautions. The World Health Organization has a pandemic preparedness plan checklist and impact management suggestions. So how does Turkey measure up to those outside of the social distancing and the lack of, or the insufficient number of testings that are being done?
I think this question can be answered two ways. First, we are not fully aware how the Turkish authorities run the preparedness plan because there's a lack of transparency. So the World Health Organization is just suggesting the countries how to move on. So in the end, the local authorities or the country national authorities have the power to listen or not. So if you look at the website of World Health Organization, there's a large technical guideline for that. The critical preparedness, readiness, country-level coordination, surveillance, rapid response, clinical care, laboratory, so whatever you can think of. And these are based on the past experiences with Ebola, with other SARS and flu, but also specifically updated every day, depending on the needs of the world. So for the countries, the national planning guidelines, so there are a few recommendations, such as the coordination, planning and monitoring, the transparency, the risk communication, or the engagement with the community and building trust, and detection of the points of entry, and also widespread national laboratories. So, and there are many things. I think based on the response from Turkey, so the transparency is not there. So we still don't know where the cases are. We can infer from the authorities that it's widespread around the country, but there has to be hotspots in this case. So if we can determine the hotspots, so there could be a containment and mitigation strategies imposed strictly on some regions. And but I don't think this is happening because no one is aware of such a situation. Plus, I'm sure the authorities are following the general guidelines and they're at least considering it. But how this is implemented into the practice and how this manifests into prevention of the spread of the virus is still questionable, to my opinion.
Many experts, including yourself, have stated that confinement is one of the key precautions that governments and individuals should take. So why is there such a hesitation in Turkey to declare a state of emergency?
Indeed, that's true. The containment strategies and the radical approaches to that. In some cases, for instance, in the world now, 1 out of 5 people are under either strict curfews or have some quarantine measures. So this was necessary. In Turkey, I think these measures are not fully in effect. So beyond 65 years old, people are advised, or at least like ordered, to be at home. But the science shows that the major carrier and the spreader of the virus is more younger generations, because now, based on CDC from US or ECDC from Europe or China CDC, the disease control centers, we know that the majority of the infected people, almost 70 to 80%, are below the age of 50. These people do not show a lot of symptoms, yet they are hospitalized, and 12% of people below 55 are also requiring intensive care unit treatments. So it's not a disease for the old people or geriatric people, it's a disease for everyone. But the main carrier or the spreader is the younger people. So that's why everyone should really be contained, and the spread of the virus should really be prevented. But the reason, the motives underlying why Turkey has not yet imposed a general ban on social life is beyond my my expertise, but I can say my opinion is there's of course the human life that you can think of and put into the first front consideration, but also there are economical considerations or the motivations. So the world is facing a big crisis economically, and every big institution is trying to prevent that. And Turkey, I think, is now seeing this pandemic as an opportunity for an economic benefit. And this is what we have heard from the president's speech. That I think it was last week, he said that in 2 weeks we could see a better days, we could see a boost in our economy and so on. And thinking that 28 or 30 million people are wage workers in Turkey, and they are the majority, almost the big chunk of that mass is younger people. So if you put these people at home, the factories will not work and everything will not work. I think that is the motivation why we don't have a
state of emergency,
curfew or outgoing blockage or whatever you call it. It doesn't matter what we call it. So people should reduce the social life, but that's not happening.
Yeah, Dr. Kızıl, you mentioned that the young people especially are carriers, but again, recently in several countries, including in Turkey, there have been young people with no known underlying illnesses who have actually lost their lives due to the virus. So what does this mean? Does this mean that the virus is getting stronger? Does it have to do with different strains of the virus? I mean, there's also some that say that it is related to the blood group of the patients. Can you speak a little bit on that?
So at this point, yes, it is true that there's an epidemiological distribution of the fatality rates. If the people about 65 or 70 years old have a higher fatality rate because their bodies are not responding or fighting with the virus as the young bodies are doing that. But the rates of fatalities below 60 or even below 40 is considerable. So we shouldn't express this in terms of percentages, but in terms of numbers, because if we have a ratio between the people infected below 50 years of age and the people who are more than 65 years of age, it's like 5 to 1. So it means that 5 times more people will be infected. Young people will be infected, and the fatality rates, even though it's low, it will cost lives of young people. Now, reports show that kids also died. Kids below 15 years of age. So far, there are 3 or 4 cases, and the health professionals. So these are majority are younger people, the nurses, the doctors, and all other people working in hospitals. So they lost their lives. They will lose their lives. We can lose our lives. So it's not true that this is a disease of old age. It's an infection that can kill anyone, and not any underlying cause, a comorbidity, what we call it. So any chronic disease that increases the likelihood to be there doesn't need to be there. So to your other question, is the virus getting stronger? We don't know. The virus accumulates mutations continuously. That is a very natural and inherent property of viruses. But we are not sure, and no one knows very well at this point, whether these mutations are reducing the effectiveness or the strength of the virus or increasing it. This requires controlled experiments, laboratory experiments, cell culture experiments, or other molecular biology experiments, which will take longer. So no one can now say clearly, oh, the virus got stronger or the virus got weaker. That's not possible. And your other question was, there was another...
relating perhaps to blood groups. Is there a correlation between...
No. I think there are a lot of hypotheses, or there are a lot of ideas that people put forward. I think we have to really underscore this. So there can be millions of ways you can explain things. And that's a good practice, that everyone comes up with ideas. But science doesn't work with ideas. The ideas are cheap. You have to prove them. So the whole thing now, with the drugs, with everything, there is no real scientific consensus on many things. So anything can happen. We will see in future. We can see the picture clearly in future. But at this point, no, it's not blood groups. It's not a biological weapon, and that's for sure. And that's for sure. And all these other ideas that people come, that's understandable. We are all scared. Even scientists, doctors, everyone are scared. But I think trying to find the truth and showing that, or transmitting this transparently to the people or the public, or engaging with the public and communicating this truth, even if that's a bitter truth, is the route I think we should take. All others will definitely exacerbate the whole paranoia and the panic.
Dr. Kızıl, are there properties of the virus which are still unknown, and does that prevent any effective options for treatment?
Well, the virus is very similar to, it's a coronavirus. It's from a family of viruses that we know a lot about. But we know the genome sequence, we know the proteins, we know some of their functions and how the cell entry happens. Of course, there are weak parts. There are parts that we don't know well. For instance, we know a receptor on a cell surface, our cells, that the virus attaches and then injects its RNA genome into the cell. But are there other molecules? Are there other receptors? So what else is affecting this attachment to the surface? So these are a lot of questions that are scientific questions. Of course, we don't know. And the mutation rate and how this will have ramifications in the effectiveness or infectiousness of the virus, plus the dormancy period, the asymptomatic cases, it's believed to be considerable. Some people say it's 50%, some reports say it might be even as high as 80%, which means that we may have the virus, we don't realize it, and then we spread it. So is it true? What's the real ratio of this? And these sort of questions, and how many people will get infected in the world? This we don't know. There are modeling, so people say 50 to 70% in a 2 years' time, which might be reasonable, but we don't know. So there are a lot of things we don't know about its molecular action in humans, and we don't know the future, how this will evolve. But the science is on its course, and there are a lot of publications, there are a lot of studies being conducted. So we'll see in future. So there's still gray zones, there's still dark zones that we don't know.
I mean, indeed, as you said, there are quite a few studies being conducted in order to find a vaccine or a potential cure for the virus. Do you have, I mean, again, I just want to pick your brain here. What type of conditions need to be met before we can hope for a semblance of normalcy once again? And how do you think that would potentially impact, you know, mental health or social life and things like that?
There are two ways that we can tackle this disease. Non-pharmaceutical way, which is the mitigation strategies and social distancing and maybe radical measures, doing tests and tracing the cases and finding the cases and finding the people that had interacted with the infected person and also quarantining these people. So this is what we can do, and this is the best we can do right now. And of course, increasing the health capacities, and that's one thing. The second part is the pharmaceutical part. So, and there's a lot of studies going on. First of all, majority of the studies are at the discovery phase, which means that they are still being tried in laboratory conditions. The proof of principle studies are being performed. There are some studies that have advanced into animal models, which we call preclinical studies, or there are some studies definitely we hear in the media and a lot of news, is the clinical trials. The clinical trials are generally, at this case, it's generally repurposing of drugs that were shown to be effective for some other diseases, not specifically COVID-19. For instance, remdesivir is one drug that is an antiviral drug that is affecting the replication and effect of the virus. So people are trying it in clinical trials, which means that there are a lot of patients now for COVID-19, and these people are enrolled in studies and that. And chloroquine was another drug that was highly debated. It's an anti-malaria drug, an anti-pneumonia drug, now being tried in COVID-19. There are a lot of pros and cons, and opponents and supporters of this drug. And a recent study came from France, a very methodologically not sophisticated and criticized study told in the beginning, I think a few days ago, yes, this drug has a positive effect. But yesterday there was another study, a controlled clinical trial showed that this drug doesn't have an effect. Mm-hmm. So we don't know, we will see. I think on the other hand, these are all drugs, but if you talk about the vaccine, this is gonna take a lot longer because there's no vaccine in sight. And there are technologies that try to speed up this process, but we are still not there. And I think we have to be cautious on the pharmaceutical side, and let's hope that things will work out, because there's a large surge of infections, and the world will not get rid of this infection in 1 year. I think this is gonna take longer. That's why there's an urgent and burning need for pharmaceutical intervention. That's why this will happen at some point. The research is going on, but it's not in near future. So how we can come back to normalcy, that's a question I think no one knows. Now in Wuhan, people, the surge was flattened, the curve is flattened, and there's not much new cases. Still, now Wuhan is trying controlled release of people into the social realm, and we will see. There's always, if you don't have enough immunity in the community for this disease, it can recur, it can happen again. So we'll see. I think this will be the first observation in China, whether this disease can recur, and it may answer the questions whether it will be a seasonal thing, or it will be a continuous disease, or whether by immunizing or passive immunizing or with anything, whether we can create a buffer zone in the society to basically cut down the spread. Actually, we don't know, no one knows, but it's not going to be in a short time. I think this will be a part of our life now, this new virus. But how that part will be is the next question. We have a lot of coronaviruses, 4 that can infect humans. This is the common cold that we have is caused by coronaviruses, NL63 or some others. Whether SARS-CoV-2 will become one of them or will be totally eradicated, we are going to see that.
Well, on that, thank you very much, Dr. Kızıl, for making the time to join us this evening.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
The People's Democratic Party has put together their own package of measures to safeguard the economy after those announced last week by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan were criticized for prioritizing the interests of the business world rather than the citizens. Republican People's Party Chairman Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu has also revealed the package of his own party.
Making a statement at the Parliament on March 24, HDP Vice Co-Chair for Economic Affairs Garo Paylan has noted that the economy package of the government does not protect people with poor income, the unemployed, the poor, or laborers. Paylan said, "The government has been urging the citizens to stay home for weeks, but it does not say what they will eat and drink, who will pay their bills while staying home. What will our citizens eat? Stones or what?" Paylan shared the economic security package against coronavirus outbreak, which includes 12 articles. The measures proposed by the package include the suspension of rent payments, credit payments to banks, cancellation of student debts, and free electricity, water, natural gas, telephone and internet, the ban of dismissals, paid leaves, increase in the minimum pension wage, and compensation for losses incurred by shopkeepers, income support for the unemployed, for women who do home-based daily work, and for farmers. Meanwhile, CHP's list includes steps to protect people and businesses, starting with a pledge to reduce and postpone payment of telephone and utility bills for office, manufacturing, and agricultural businesses, also offering them VAT exemptions. The package also demands the country's 193,000 contracted teachers continue to receive wages while schools are closed, as well as benefits and overtime payments for health workers. Another recommendation on Kılıçdaroğlu's list is for the return to work of health workers who were among the tens of thousands dismissed from their jobs by emergency decree after the failed coup attempt in 2016. Further, it is proposed that pensioners receive a boost of 1,000 liras per month for 3 months. The party is also set to demand additional assistance both for unemployed workers and for companies that the virus has forced to close shop, calling on the government to make a daily cash payment of 250 liras to support the 149,000 small businesses that have shut down. There will also be a demand that the government protects people's jobs by banning dismissals and unpaid leave throughout the crisis. Besides this, the party is set to propose a measure to ensure free treatments at all public and private hospitals, while asking for contribution charges for prescription medicine and physical examinations to be waived for workers and retirees.
Turkish authorities are drafting measures to reduce the nation's prison population in an effort to stop the disease from spreading among inmates. The proposed package has been criticized widely for excluding political prisoners from reduced prison sentences, yet releasing those convicted of sexual assault.
On March 24, lawmakers with ruling Justice and Development Party and its ally the Nationalist Movement Party submitted a law proposal to opposition party members that would release about 100,000 of the nation's 300,000 inmates, switching select convicts' jail sentences to extended probation periods to relieve overcrowded penitentiaries. The proposal would release prisoners convicted of sexual assault, gender-based violence, and drug trafficking who have completed 2/3 of their sentences, a shift from current laws that bar the release of such convicts before they complete at least 3/4 of their sentences. Those released would complete their sentences outside prison walls through an extended probation period. The measure has drawn sharp criticism from women's rights groups, who note the draft law would reduce punishments for sex offenders and convicts of gender-based violence, potentially endangering women, children, and victims of domestic abuse across Turkey. Gülsüm Kav, a spokesperson for We Will Stop Femicide platform, said reports of domestic violence have increased in recent weeks as women are stuck indoors with abusive family members amid the coronavirus pandemic, and that releasing offenders would only worsen Turkey's circumstances. We know that women are mostly murdered at their houses by their relatives. Since Turkey has been dealing with coronavirus, 10 women have been murdered by men, 8 at their houses and 2 at workplaces. It is apparent that the virus of violence, which is a public health problem as big as coronavirus, is on the rise during this period, she said. Meanwhile, the package has also been criticized for excluding political prisoners, meaning thousands, including journalists, lawyers, politicians, and others who are kept behind bars for expressing political opposition, will be denied early release despite grave health risks now posed by the pandemic. Releasing a joint statement for the press regarding the issue, 14 bar associations have referred to the equality in execution principle and underlined that political prisoners should also be released. The statement read, "We regard it as a legal and conscientious requirement that, in introducing the amendment to regime of execution, the state has to abide by the principle of equality and prohibition of discrimination, and has to introduce a regulation in accordance with the principle of equality in execution without differentiating between crimes. It should not be forgotten that what makes a state powerful is its justice, not its power." Başak Demirtaş, the wife of jailed former co-chair of the People's Democratic Party, Selahattin Demirtaş, called on authorities to suspend the execution of jail sentences and release prisoners amid the coronavirus outbreak. She said in a video posted on Twitter that for the first time since her husband was put in jail, she could not make her weekly visitation due to the authorities suspending family visitations to keep the virus from spreading. Demirtaş said that the suspension of prison visitations is not a sufficient measure against the coronavirus, as prisons already struggle to provide basic needs. She said that many people are being held in jail despite their old age or severe illnesses. Demirtaş thereby called on authorities to release prisoners in pre-trial detention and suspend the execution of sentences of convicted prisoners. "This is what is required of universal law and being a human. What falls upon us is to raise our voice before deaths take place in prisons. Please, let's raise our voice," she said.
On March 23, the Interior Ministry appointed trustee mayors to 8 more municipalities run by the People's Democratic Party in the southeastern provinces. Including this latest move, the government has appointed trustees to a total of 40 municipalities won by the HDP since the 2019 March local elections.
The mayors represented Batman, Diyarbakır's Eğil, Silvan, Lice, and Ergani districts, Bitlis's Güroymak district, Iğdır's Halfeli district, and Siirt's Gökçebağ district. The Interior Ministry said in a statement that 4 mayors had been detained and there was an arrest warrant for a 5th, while the other 3 were under investigation. All 8 of them were accused of being members of a terrorist group. On March 25, 2 days after being detained, Diyarbakır Eğil co-mayor Mustafa Akkul has been arrested on charge of membership of a terrorist organization. Detained along with Akkul, Diyarbakır Lice co-mayor Tarık Mercan and Silvan co-mayor Naşide Toprak have been released with an international travel ban and on the condition of not leaving their houses. HDP co-chair Mithat Sancar said in a press conference that the removal of the 8 mayors from the HDP was an example of the government using the coronavirus outbreak as an opportunity, stating that none of the HDP officials have received official communications prior to their removal. "We have been in solidarity with the world and the international community during this pandemic. However, the administration clearly prefers discrimination and polarization," he said.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. See you next Friday at 9 p.m. Good night.